There is now an acronym that is ascribed to some children in hospitals in Gaza. WCNSF. Wounded child, no surviving family. No other term sums up the tragic, horrendous human cost of the brutal attacks that Israel is perpetrating against the civilian population of Palestine than that. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to listen to a segment on the RTE Drive Time radio programme that featured Dr. Ghassan Abu Sittu, who is a surgeon working in Gaza, and Dr. Omar Abdel Manan, who is a founder of Gaza Medic Voices. And I would encourage every TD to listen back to their harrowing accounts. Describing the situation at Ali Baptist Hospital in Gaza City, Dr. Abu Sittu reported, "We are only able to take the most critically wounded life-saving surgeries to the operating room. Everyone else is bandaged up and kept on hospital grounds, and there is just no end in sight. We're surrounded by the sound of gunfire and tank fire and air raids, and every half hour there's a new influx of wounded brought in by the ambulance service. We set up a field hospital just to figure out who we can help." Dr. Abdel Manning said that the situation is absolutely horrific. "I wake up thinking it cannot get worse, and then we hear of atrocities happening that are 100% man-made." And he continued, "We have heard reports, first-hand eyewitnesses' accounts that Israeli snipers are firing at nursing staff in a hospital and killing them. We have heard reports of patients trying to flee when there is a moment of peace between bombardment after bombardment, and they are shot as they leave the hospital as if they were animals trying to flee." And he set out the context. This is what happens when you dehumanise a whole population of 2 million people, and through the systemic targeting of the population of healthcare facilities and healthcare workers. We have a healthcare system that has collapsed as a result of the direct pressure of displacing 1 million people from the north to the south. We have 5,000 children killed, 1,000 under the rubble. And referring to Al-Shifa Hospital, Dr. Abdel Manning said, "There were 60,000 people sheltering in that hospital, refugees sitting, sleeping, eating in the hospital grounds, a hospital 500% over its bed capacity. This hospital has been evacuated. So I don't know where these people went. I imagine they fled, but I imagine a large proportion of them have been killed, and that these are the bodies that are lying there." And then he said, "There are reports, first-hand eyewitness reports of stray dogs eating the flesh from these bodies." He also had to respond to the Israeli propaganda that somehow the barbarity that they are inflicted is injusted because they say these hospitals are Hamas bases. He said, "We, as a medical staff, have been to every one of these hospitals. We have had unfettered access into every single operating theatre and clinic in those buildings. We have never seen anything that amounts to Hamas militant activity." So I suppose, Minister, it's down to who you believe. Those doctors on the ground trying to save the lives of innocent children, or the IDF that has made those children WCNSF, wounded child, no surviving family. Dr. Ghassan was asked what he expects over the coming days. His reply, "Just more of the same in terms of the wounded, more of the same in terms of the sense of helplessness and absolute isolation, and a sense of betrayal by a world that seems to have decided to look the other way." And he implored, "I am surrounded by families like yours and mine who have had their lives torn apart for the past 37 days. Our shared humanity dictates that people stand up and be counted." And Dr. Abdel Manning asked, "What are we teaching our children? How can we, as a collective community of human beings, look at ourselves in the mirror and say to our children and our grandchildren, we allowed in 2023 2 million Gazans to potentially be wiped off the face of the planet?" What Dr. Ghassan Abu Sittu and Dr. Omar Abdel Manning have described are war crimes, and they are calling for ceasefires, as this House rightly has done. But they are also calling for action to exert pressure on Israel. The Sinn Féin motion is a response to the cries from Gaza. It sets out simply that Ireland will use our voice by referring these heinous acts to the International Criminal Court. The government counter-motion doesn't set out a single argument as to why it can't make this referral, only the excuses as to why it won't. A referral to the ICC can be made by Ireland, and it should be made. There should be no excuses. The Sinn Féin motion should be adopted unanimously as a response from Ireland to the obscenity that is WCOSF. Wounded child, no surviving family.
Councillor, over the past month and more, the world has watched in absolute horror as the Gazan people face annihilation. Missiles rain down upon 2 million people who have been denied food, fuel and water in one of the most densely populated areas in the world. We are bearing witness to a cataclysmic event. We are bearing witness to war crimes. We are bearing witness to genocide. Israel acts with the impunity through its indiscriminate slaughter of a trapped population. Entire families have been killed in their beds. Many more are trapped in the rubble. 1.1 million have been forcibly displaced in an event that echoes the Nakba of 1948. Schools, hospitals and vital infrastructure are being flattened. Where they stand still, blackouts are a constant risk, with the likelihood that fuel will completely run out on Thursday. This ferocious siege is not out of character for Israel. For decades, Palestinians have had their lives ravaged and brutalised by Israel's apartheid regime. They have been living under an occupation, blockaded for 16 years. Their land has been occupied and annexed. They have been denied a right of return. And what is the international community doing? In truth, very little. Those countries who have remained silent are complicit and have set the context in which deaths of thousands of men, women and children is viewed as permissible. Shame on those Western countries who have failed to speak up to call for a ceasefire. Even greater shame on those countries that have called this mass slaughter a legitimate act of self-defence. We must take a stand against Zionist, racist sentiments that are deployed to legitimate mass displacement and ethnic cleansing. We must call for a ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. And we must hold Israel to account. They must be held to account at the International Criminal Court. Without a resounding and unified voice from the international community, Palestinians will remain under constant and existential threat. Ireland can and must lead. Support this motion. Make the referral to the ICC.
Last count, Corla. The Minister, we must refer Israel to the ICC. The actions that has horrified not only us who are graced with the protection of distance from these attacks, but the rest of Europe and the wider world. The deliberate targeting and killing of thousands of civilians, for the targeting and destroying of civilian infrastructure, hospitals and schools. The forced displacement of Palestinian civilians is beyond comprehension at this point. And I say that today as we stand here, where this afternoon it was reported that not only are hospitals struggling to maintain desperately needed life support and equipment to those who are wounded, but their mortuaries are now running out of electricity in order to be able to preserve the dead for a dignified burial. We've heard of mass graves being opened, not because of want or because of any inclination to do so, but because of the desperate need to do so. We stand here this afternoon, and I'm going to read specifically from this. The entire population of Gaza is now a humanitarian case. 500,000 people in the West Bank, while because what has been happening in Gaza continues, we have seen the worst situation in the West Bank for many, many years in terms of the number of people being killed. The Irish government must exercise its right under Article 14 of the Rome Statute and refer to the ICC. Our own Taoiseach has spoke of collective punishment, the cutting off of water, of electricity, of food, and of cutting food to mass civilian people is absolutely against humanitarian law. And while you may differ on a lot to what we do, Minister, I trust you are somebody with a level of humanity who recognises this as being absolutely catastrophically wrong. We see as Irish people the plight of the Palestinians, and we see the egregious destruction that is being rained down on them relentlessly, day in and day out. And we want to see a pathway for peace. We want to see hostages released, but we want to also see those who are responsible for this destruction being held to account for it. This is an issue of humanity. This is an issue of what we place value on. We may be a small country, Minister, but our voice is powerful and it will not go unnoticed. It is in the power of the Irish Government to refer Israel to the ICC, and is what should be done because it is the right thing to do.
Minister, as you know, long before the recent disastrous events in Palestine and Israel, we had the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and B'Tselem designating Israel as an apartheid state. On the 18th of July 1984, Minister, Mary Manning, who was a shop worker at Dunn Stores in Henry Street here in Dublin, refused to handle South African goods in protests against the apartheid regime. 3 years later, Ireland became the first state in the Western world to ban imports of South African goods. That's the stand that we took back then. We led the way, and the rest of the world continued in that path, and eventually that apartheid regime was brought down and justice was delivered for all of the South African people. Despite the fact the Occupied Territories Bill was passed by both houses, it wasn't implemented. Despite the fact that my colleague, Deputy John Brady, brought forward the illegal Israeli Settlements Divestment Bill, it wasn't accepted or implemented. At some point, we have to go back to the approach that we took during the South African challenge from people who upheld humanity and decency across the world, starting with that woman, Mary Manning, and all of her colleagues that joined her. So, Minister, the appeal is to go back to the practices that we had in the past that were the right ones, to make a stand for what is right and decent. All of the TDs here, led by our spokesperson, Matt Carthy, have and will outline the disastrous genocide that is taking place. We have to refer Israel to the International Criminal Court. We have to take a stand in line with our tradition in this country, standing up for people who are oppressed and standing up against oppressive regimes.
Thanks, Laskin Corla. Minister, distressing as it is to see, hear and read what is happening in Gaza, great credit must be given to the doctors, the aid workers, the photographers and the camera crews who risk their lives every day to tell us these horrific stories. Without them, we would not be able to call on those responsible to stop. I would like to thank people right across the world who have come out in their millions to support the Palestinian people. I want to see Emily Hand and all hostages released, including those in Israeli jails. Also, 2.2 million hostages pinned into Gaza for the last 17 years. In the last 5 weeks, 11,200 Palestinians have been killed, 4,600 of those children, 28,000 injured, 1.5 million people displaced, a child killed every 10 minutes, 3,250 Palestinians missing under the rubble, 1,700 of those are children, 50 media workers killed, including 38 journalists, 101 aid workers killed, 22 of the 35 hospitals forced to close down, and most medical clinics closed. Babies dying because no electricity or fuel for incubators. The daily existence of the Palestinian people has become an endless cycle of despair. World leaders look on while men, women and children are being slaughtered. I wonder to myself why. Is it because you want a base in the Middle East? Is it because Israel has too much power, money and influence in your own country? Is it because the European Union licensed $2 billion in arms sales to Israel since 2012? Is it because the Palestinian people are not as white as the rest of us and their lives don't matter? Or is it all of the above? While I am not directly impacted by what is going on in Gaza, I get it very hard to watch the news every night. For hours I think of what the world is letting happen to the Palestinian people. I ask these world leaders in the West, how do you sleep at night, giving Israel a free hand to do what they like and answer to nobody? You need to stop treating them like spoiled brats. It is time you got the courage to say stop. I say to Netanyahu and his war cabinet, I hope and pray that I live long enough to see you before the International Criminal Court where you belong. To the Palestinian people, my heart goes out for you. You have the support of right-minded people right across the world. Ireland stands with you. And remember, it is not those who can inflict the most, but those who can endure the most who will win. Thank you.
Firstly, I want to commend Minister all the people who gathered in Ballina on Sunday, and it didn't go amiss. That is the ancestral home of Joe Biden. But the response of the European leaders to the onslaught of Gaza, to the indiscriminate killing of Palestinians, is a failure that they will have to explain to future generations. It makes a mockery of the much-claimed European values. When I look at the European response, I see a colonial outlook, a colonial values. Ireland has so far been a light in the very, very dark sky. But this is not the time to be patting ourselves in the back. Every day that goes by, Israel slaughters hundreds more Palestinians. I commend the government for speaking up for the Palestinian people, for saying that there must be consequences for breaking international law. Now action must follow those words. This government should refer Israel to the International Criminal Court, a court that can investigate war crimes against the Palestinian people. Israel is a serial breaker of international law, as recognised by this House. There should already be harsh diplomatic economic sanctions in place. All we are asking for is that Israel be referred to the International Criminal Court. If this is too far, if this is too much to ask, then your words about war crimes and consequences are meaningless. We cannot sit by and watch ethnic cleansing and genocide unfold on our screens. Anything we can do to put pressure on Israel into a ceasefire, or to hold a mirror for other Western governments, that they see that they're on the wrong side of history, that they're providing political cover to a violent Israeli regime, that they should listen to the groundswell of support among people all over the world for a ceasefire and justice for Palestine. I urge you, I truly urge you, and I urge every representative in this stall to support this motion. Let's come together on this to send this strong message on behalf of Irish people, a message that says that we see these atrocities for what they are, that we see the unimaginable violence directed at the Palestinian people.
John Braid.
Thanks, Les Corla. Minister, Israel is carrying out war crimes in Gaza on a daily basis, as they have been doing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem for decades now. The collective punishment of the civilian population in Gaza is a war crime, Minister. It has led to the death of over 11,000 civilians, 2/3 of them being women and children. 101 UN workers have been murdered, the highest number in any conflict in the UN's history. Israel has instrumentalised human aid as a weapon of war. And despite the fact that the situation in Palestine was referred to the International Criminal Court in 2014, the ICC has been unable to investigate Israeli war crimes, primarily because of a lack of funding, but also because of the blatant interference by both Israel and the United States, combined with the ambivalence of the international community. Both Israel and the US have claimed that the International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction. Israel described the Palestinian Authority's referral of Israel to the ICC as a hostile act, threatening the Palestinian Authority with the withholding of taxes and customs collected by Israel on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. Donald Trump, Minister, he went further, actually imposing sanctions on the International Criminal Court prosecutors and threatening legal action against them if they investigated Israeli war crimes. The immunity which has been conferred on Israel for its past and continuing international crimes in the occupied territories by the international community has emboldened its efforts during the current wave of violence. Ireland needs to make a referral to the International Criminal Court for Israel's war crimes in Gaza. In 2022, the government provided $3 million towards the ICC investigation in Ukraine. Minister, the Belgian government recently provided €5 million for the ICC to investigate the war crimes in Palestine. The Irish government needs to match that funding, Minister, if not go further. The government also needs to support the immediate advancement of the illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill, because the government have made the Irish taxpayers shareholders in the crimes being perpetrated by Israel as we speak. Ireland needs, Minister, to send a clear message that the days of Israel's immunity for its war crimes is over. Minister, please do the right thing, be on the right side of history, support the motion and refer Israel to its right place, and that is The Hague and the International Criminal Court.
Corla, Deputies, thank you for your attention. I welcome the opportunity to address the House on the tragic and shocking events we have witnessed over the last few weeks in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territory. The situation in Gaza has escalated to a horrifying degree, and we have also seen a very worrying surge in violence in the West Bank also. We cannot ignore the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our eyes in Gaza. The reports that have emerged of the situation on the ground are truly shocking, and efforts to preserve civilian life must be redoubled. From the start of this recent serious escalation of violence, Ireland has been to the forefront of international calls for a humanitarian ceasefire. The Taoiseach has highlighted the importance of reflecting Ireland's long-standing belief that the path to peace and security for all people of Israel and Palestine lies in a dialogue and a peace process. As the violence has escalated, the Taoiseach and Taoiseach have called repeatedly for an immediate and urgent humanitarian ceasefire. We have also been clear in insisting that all parties, state and non-state alike, have obligations under international humanitarian law that are binding. Israel has the right to self-defence, but it must, absolutely must, be exercised in line with international humanitarian law. Hamas must immediately release, without preconditions, all hostages being held in Gaza. The international humanitarian law is not optional, it is obligatory. We have called for an urgent scaling up of humanitarian assistance to Gaza. We voted in favour of the UN General Assembly resolution and the recent Arab resolution at UNESCO. Within the EU, we have advocated very strongly for agreement by the European Council to call for a humanitarian pause to allow aid reach those so desperately in need. We are clear-cut, though, that this is not enough. We will continue to lead calls and advocate with like-minded EU member states for stronger and clearer common policies reflecting the EU's fundamental values, including our commitment to peace. Beyond our calls for a ceasefire and for humanitarian access, we have also strongly condemned the acts which violate international humanitarian law. Parties to a conflict, all parties to all conflicts, must comply with international humanitarian law. The government has clearly underlined that international humanitarian law, including the prohibition on the targeting of civilians, the principles of distinction, precaution and proportionality, the prohibition of collective punishment and the prohibition on taking of hostages as used as human shields applies in all armed conflicts. We have called clearly on all actors to abide by their obligations in this regard. It is clear to me and those of us here tonight, Deputies, that we have not always seen this being applied over the last 2 months. It is therefore vital that any and all breaches of international humanitarian law in relation to the situation are currently investigated by an impartial and independent body. We must see objective and unbiased investigations take place. There is no substitute for this. We must also see full accountability for all breaches of international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law exists for a reason. Its overarching aim is to protect civilians. This means all civilians in an armed conflict, no matter where that is. As the Red Cross movement, the guardians of international humanitarian law, have said, in the law of armed conflict there is no hierarchy in pain or suffering, and the Israeli and the Palestinian have equal rights to live in peace and security, and we all must state this unambiguously. The rules of war exist to help preserve humanity in its darkest moments, and they desperately need to be followed today. They are and should remain our compass to ensure that we put humanity first. The rules are very clear and they apply to all sides in a conflict everywhere, state and non-state actors alike. The International Criminal Court is at the very heart of the international justice system. The court has a key role in promoting and upholding the rule of law and pursuing accountability for the most serious international crimes, including serious violations of international humanitarian law. The government has today decided to make a voluntary contribution of €3 million to the International Criminal Court. This contribution is in a response to the urgent need of the court, which the court's prosecutor has already repeatedly emphasised, most recently in his statement when he visited the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. Ireland is a consistent and strong supporter of the court and of its independence and impartiality. Last year, we also announced an additional €3 million of a voluntary contribution on top of our annual contribution to the court in order to meet the court's urgent funding needs, which are exacerbated by the situation in Ukraine. €1 million was disbursed to the Office of the Prosecutor to benefit the prosecutor's work in all countries. The remaining €2 million has been disbursed to various other trust funds in the International Criminal Court that facilitate key tasks of the court, including €1.4 million to the Trust Fund for Victims. Karen Khan, prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, has confirmed unambiguously that the ICC has jurisdiction over the current situation that we see unfolding. Deputies, you will have seen the Taoiseach's statement over the weekend in which he outlined the current status of the ICC investigation. Palestine itself, as a state party to the ICC, referred the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory to the prosecutor under Article 14 of the Rome Statute. In May 2021, the prosecutor announced the opening of an investigation into the situation in Palestine, including Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The investigation covers all crimes within the jurisdiction of the court, including war crimes and crimes against humanity alleged to have been committed since 2014. This gives the court jurisdiction over any crimes committed within Palestine or by Palestine nationals outside of it, including in Israel. And let me repeat, the prosecutor, Karen Khan, has made absolutely clear on a number of occasions over the last month that this investigation covers the current conflict, including all events on and from October the 7th of this year. I think that sentence bears repeating. And let me repeat, the prosecutor, Karen Khan, has made absolutely clear on a number of occasions over the last month that this investigation covers the current conflict, including all events on and from the 7th of October this year. And let me repeat again, he has confirmed this unambiguously, that an active investigation is currently ongoing. As such, I'm surprised at the text of the motion proposed tonight. The proposal that Ireland should take the step of referring the situation to the ICC prosecutor under Article 14, if followed, would simply repeat an action that is already has been taken. It would not progress the ongoing investigation any further. It is not clear to me, therefore, what the intention of this motion, which demands that Ireland refer a situation to the court which has already been referred and demands that the court investigate something which the prosecutor has confirmed he is already investigating. And let me be clear, referring the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory to the ICC under Article 14 would therefore, in our view, serve no legal purpose. Indeed, it could also be viewed by some as attempting to politicise the court. Attempting to politicise the court, to pursue the prosecutor, and this can be interpreted by some as to put pressure on the prosecutor into prioritising his investigation over another and possibly undermine the independent and impartial nature of both the prosecutor and the court. That work is ongoing and he should be allowed to continue his work.
Deputy, please.
Ireland's foreign policy and our credibility international as a principled and consistent voice has been long based on our adherence to the respect for international law, including international humanitarian law. We take the rules-based international order and the multilateral bodies created by the international community seriously at all times, making a referral to the ICC prosecutor that we do not believe that anything to the legal or practical terms and which could be seen as undermining the court's independence and impartiality. Would, I believe, potentially damage Ireland's credibility and undermine the principles which underpin our foreign policy, not to mind an attempt to possibly politicise the actual court. Making a referral to the ICC prosecutor that we do not believe adds anything in legal terms could, in our view, as I said already, undermine the principles which underpin our foreign policy. As such, deputies, the government is instead tabling a counter-motion on the matter. The counter-motion clearly expresses Ireland's unwavering support for the vital work of the International Criminal Court and commits to continuing to support this, including through our annual assessed financial contribution of €1.4 million this year, together with the additional sums.
Are you formally moving that motion?
I formally move the motion, and Ireland will continue to be an advocate for the role of the ICC and urges all state parties to the Rome Statute to ensure the court has the resources it needs to fulfil its vital mandate, including in relation to Palestine. I urge you all to support this counter-motion as a strong statement of Ireland's position and support for the international rules-based order and bodies. We recognise the importance of the ongoing ICC investigation and of the vital role of thorough and balanced accountability mechanisms in holding the perpetrators account for any violations of international humanitarian law. And before I close, I want to take this opportunity to echo calls made by the Taoiseach and Taoiseach for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to happen now. The Government will also continue to prioritise all avenues in support of a longer-term pathway away from violence and back towards a process of lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Just before moving on, a message from Select Committee. The Select Committee on Justice has completed its consideration of the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Human Trafficking Bill 2023 and has made amendments thereto. So, Anish Arashguji Sinn Féin, and 5 speakers, 2 minutes each. Chris Andrews.
Minister, the double standards from government is absolutely sickening. There was no issue or problem referring Russia to the International Criminal Court. The hypocrisy is absolutely absolutely clear and unacceptable. In the past 24 hours, I've received thousands of emails from the public asking that Ireland take a stand against the horror, the genocide, the carpet bombing engulfing the Gaza Strip. From contacts there, I've been told that dogs are starting to eat the corpses of the bodies in the rubble, and it's a never-ending horror. We are witnessing genocide. Today, it's Palestine. Tomorrow, it could be anyone. We need to see the international community take a stand against genocide occurring in Gaza. There has to be a cost to Israel ignoring international law. Israel has faced no diplomatic consequences for breaching international law, committing war crimes, and this must change. So Ireland must step up and refer Israel to the International Criminal Court. But let's be straight, Minister. The EU is not a neutral body watching this genocide. The EU is not some innocent bystander. The reality is the EU is an enabler of this genocide, an enabler that has profited in billions due to Israel's brutal system of apartheid and its war crimes on the people of Palestine. Since 2012, the EU states have licensed over $2 billion worth of contracts, of military contracts, to Israel. So while the EU hints at Israel to show some restraint, if the EU is serious about a lasting peace in the region, they should stop selling and profiting from the weapons being used in genocide. We saw the pressure the ICC arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin has created, severely restricting his travel out of the fear of arrest. Israel must be referred to the ICC and Ireland must do this.
International humanitarian law is not being defended as long as countries watch as war crimes and crimes against humanity are perpetrated against the people of Gaza. Today, 170 bodies, including those of newborns, are being buried in a mass grave near El Sheikh Hospital after vital hospital equipment failed due to bombardment and power cuts. bringing the death toll to over 11,000, including 4,630 children. The call we are making here today isn't being done in the absence of evidence or in the absence of key figures in the international community asserting that what the people of Gaza are being subject amounts to war crimes. The United Nations General Secretary spoke of his deep concerns about clear violations of international humanitarian law. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said that sieges endangering civilians, collective punishment by Israel and forcible evacuation of civilians amounts to war crimes. The prosecutor of the ICC called upon state parties to the court and non-state parties to help collectively vindicate the Geneva Conventions, the principles of international law and the Rome Statute, to share evidence regarding any crime so that the court can properly investigate and prosecute them as appropriate. As such, I call on everyone here to act upon those concerns and support our call to refer the situation in Palestine to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Because the truth is that if we fail to do so, and every country does the same, then what purpose does the international law serve? Ireland, as a state party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, needs to play its role in setting a precedent, and to act if others fail to do so. Most immediately, we must reiterate our demand for immediate ceasefires, for the immediate release of all hostages, and for the unconditional adherence by all parties to their commitments under international law. And we need to call time on the world leaders who have left to influence Israel, but who failed to act effectively. My question to those in the international leaders is how many deaths need to happen before you act? So we must act. We must use the avenues available to us, including the International Criminal Court, to make a stand. I'm
going to be full stop here. It's simple as this. We have to refer the Israeli government to the International Criminal Court. I ask you to withdraw your counter motion. I want to bring up a statement on the High Representatives on behalf of the European Union. A number of days ago said the EU condemns the use of hospitals and civilians as human shields by Hamas. Down further says the EU emphasises that international humanitarian law stipulates that hospitals, medical supplies and civilians inside hospitals must be protected. So there's a contradiction straight away. Now, my biggest problem here is from even speaking to people today. A number of years ago, we listened to a different government mentioning weapons of mass destruction and went in and blitzed the country. And funny enough, there was no weapons of mass destruction. So I'm getting worried about the actual misinformation that's coming out here. As it stands at the moment, 70% of all those people killed in Gaza and the West Bank are women and children. And the only reason that so many have been killed in hospitals, it's the last place they can go. It's an utter disgrace. It's an absolute genocide. The one thing I will say is one thing I never ever want to see in my life again, and I stopped going on social media and watching the news. Watching children being swept against cars like autumn leaves being blown against the wall and being picked up and bagged and buried. It's an absolute utter disgrace and a shame. And it's a shame on you as a government if you don't support this motion. We have to do the right thing. We've been persecuted for years. We've learned by experience. And I want to commend everybody in this House that supports this motion, and I commend everybody outside this House, all over the world, that has supported these Palestinian people, and I'm proud to be one of those.
The tragedy that is Gaza's Nakba, that is being played out for all to see, and the atrocities that are being committed by Israel in Gaza are being done with the full knowledge that the world is watching. Gaza has a population of 2.3 million, half of which are children, in an area that is half the size of County Louth, the smallest county in Ireland. Thousands of them have already been killed by Israeli bombs, and tens of thousands more will be forever scarred by the terrible traumas they witness every hour of every day. What sort of future can these children look forward to? Like their parents and grandparents, it will be one of despair, oppression, and being treated like animals. Palestinians are being dehumanised like this in order to justify the attacks on civilian areas and to justify the mounting number of civilian deaths. Attacks on civilian areas, hospitals, the wounded, medical personnel, and protected areas of war are war crimes, as is the blocking of access to electricity, fuel and water by Israel. Across Palestine, Palestinian lands are being stolen as illegal settlements are built almost entirely on what even Israel would regard as Palestinian lands. There has been a deliberate and aggressive expansion of settlements that undermines the viability of a Palestinian state under the two-state solution. It also undermines Israel's own prospects for peace. There has always been attacks on Palestinian villages by settlers, but in recent weeks these attacks have escalated. Settlers have carried out 241 attacks in the West Bank and forced around 1,000 Palestinians to flee their homes. There must be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations for the release of those held by both Israel and Hamas. The solutions to this conflict are already in place, but while there is not the political will to implement the solutions, there will always be conflict in Palestine.
The number of dead and injured in Gaza is so large that it almost defies our ability to comprehend it. 11,180 dead, 4,609 of them children, 3,900 of them women, 28,200 injured and 2,700 trapped in rubble. By the time this debate ends, 12 more children will have been killed. Children wiped out by the murderous Israeli military who are hell-bent on clearing Gaza of every last Palestinian and who view hospitals, schools and people queuing up for bread as targets, legitimate targets. And no one could condemn or condone the attack on the Israeli civilian population on the 7th of October that led to this latest outbreak of ethnic cleansing by Israel. But that attack was not a spontaneous act of violence. We cannot see it in isolation, or are we blind to the oppression and policy of apartheid with which the Palestinian people have been subjected for the last 75 years? The world turned its back on Palestine as its people were driven from their lands and into camps where generations of Palestinians now live. The US has given financial, political and military cover, while hundreds of thousands of illegal Israeli settlers have steadily encroached and stolen more and more land in direct violation of international law. And even now, under the cover of attacks on Gaza, settlers are enacting violence on the West Bank and their homes burnt and destroyed. A blatant case of ethnic cleansing. I want to wish the tarnished Micheál Martin well as he heads off to the region this week and hope he has success in advocating for peace. There must be an immediate ceasefire. All hostages must be released. Israel must be referred to the International Court. And can I end by thanking councillors of South Dublin County Council and my Sinn Féin colleague, Councillor Louise Dunn, for passing a motion of solidarity and agreeing to fly the flag, the Palestinian flag. And can I end by calling for an end to this war on children.
Gaza is a graveyard for children. The nightmare in Gaza is more than a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis of humanity. That's what Antonio Guterres told us a week ago, and I think it's fair to say that the situation has drastically disimproved. I assume there's absolute agreement across government parties with the earlier ministerial statement that the Israeli onslaught on Gaza is a war on children, and you cannot build peace on the mass graves of children, and that Israel has become blinded by rage. We look at RTE. Dr. Ahmed El-Mokhalati, a surgeon inside Al-Shifa Hospital, told Reuters by phone that the main risk now was from dead bodies decomposing. Burying a 120 body needs a lot of equipment. It can't be by hand efforts and by single-person efforts. It will take hours and hours to be able to bury all these bodies. That is the reality that Palestinians in Gaza are dealing with. We are now talking about 11,240 Palestinians dead. 4,630 children, 101 UN workers, journalists and others, obviously enemies of Israel or collateral damage. The result is the same. Refugee camps, hospitals, dead babies. The numbers will be greater tomorrow. Israeli spokespeople will refute these figures and speak of the IDF being the most moral army in the world, and we do everything to avoid civilian deaths. We give warnings and send text messages. This is a nuclear power that is pulverizing a civilian Palestinian population and pretending that Hamas are an existential threat to modern-day Israel. We look at the regime of Benjamin Netanyahu. It's where chancellorism meets absolute racism. We need, Minister, to refer Israel, as the war criminal it is, to the International Criminal Court, as was done by here and many other states with Russia. I'm going to leave it at that. I could go on for hours.
We've kept this motion really simple. We're asking our Dáil to refer Israel to the International Criminal Court in the name of Ireland, in the name of humanity, decency and international rule of law. The murder of UN staff, the targeting of journalists, the killing of their families, the evisceration of men, women and children, the killing of ICU nurses and doctors. I saw the last ever interview with Dr. Hammam Allow of La Shifa Hospital yesterday before he was murdered by Israel. The interviewer asked him why he didn't leave and go south with his family. He replied that he didn't go to med school so that he would think only about his own life. That wasn't the reason he became a doctor. That if he left, who would treat his patients? Who, Minister, because Israel has murdered him, he can't. Dr. Allow was not a member of Hamas. Well over 4,500 children are not members of Hamas. We should not ride on the coattails of the investigation signalled by prosecutor Karim Khan or the French lawyer Gilles Devers and his growing team of international lawyers. By referring Israel to the International Criminal Court, we send a clear signal to the world that Ireland is a serious international voice, a voice that rejects the criminal targeting of hospitals, ambulances, refugee camps and schools, the deprivation of food, water, medicine and fuel. This should be an open and shut case. By Israel's politicians and IDF's own words will they be condemned. This war will end the more pressure is exerted on Israel. That means countries are going to have to raise their head above the parapet for the dominoes to fall. The sooner this war ends, the more lives are saved. If a ceasefire was called yesterday, every Gazan killed today by Israel would be saved. Every action matters. Every day matters. Human lives are at stake here. The dogs in the street know it. The dogs in Gaza know it because they're eating the evidence, dining on dead corpses while the world is silently watching. It is more than decent humanity can bear. Do the right thing.
Thanks, Dáil, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion. What we have seen over the past 6 weeks in the Middle East has shocked the world and shocked all decent people, including in this country. And first we want to condemn the actions of Hamas on the 7th and their attacks on Israeli civilians. And particularly I want to extend sympathy to the family of Kim Danty, who's related to the Cooper family in Coleraine, near where I come from myself, in South Laois. They have been through a terrible trauma and what's happened there. However, the actions of Israel is shocking and is horrific. Palestinians, and this hasn't started on the 7th of October, Palestinians have been driven off their lands, murdered, tortured, treated as subhumans, forced to live under an apartheid system, humiliated day in and day out, and treated as refugees in their own land for the last 75 years. The slaughter of the past 5 weeks is unprecedented. Whole neighbourhoods blown apart. Nowhere is safe in Gaza. Hospitals, schools, prayer houses, creches, homes. Refugees bombed and murdered as they fled for their lives. Denial of water, food, medicine. These are war criminals that are doing this. The state of Israel is a war criminal. And Israel isn't listening. The ambassador is simply disseminating propaganda on behalf of the government and the army carrying out these horrific actions. Anyone who criticises Israel's actions is branded as anti-Semitic. What a load of rubbish. They seek to defend and justify the war crimes committed by their state. Does Israel really believe that they're going to be safer after all these actions? Or is it ludicrous to believe that they will? That their borders will be more secure? No, they won't. They're making the whole Middle East less secure, including their own country. It's time for referral to International Criminal Court. It's time for these war criminals to be charged and brought before it and treated the way we should be treated, as criminals on the international stage.
Look, I have to say I am really disappointed by the government response this evening, and particularly that response was conveyed by the deputy that actually brought the Occupied Territories Bill to the Oireachtas. The government response smacks of double standards. Just to put in context and to respond to some of the government charges. On the 28th of February 2022, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan announced that he had begun the process of a formal investigation into the situation in Ukraine. It was the 2nd of March, after that Ireland joined other states in referring the situation to the International Criminal Court. Clearly, the fact that the ICC had already had a process in train was no barrier to additional referrals being made. The same would be true in respect of Palestine. Ireland was one of 41 states that signed that referral. Why 41 states, when according to the logic set out by the government tonight, one would have been enough? It's because each of those 41 governments rightly claimed to the view that each signatory added a political impetus and a strengthened mandate to the criminal court prosecutor. The same would be true in respect of Palestine. On top of the referral that Ireland co-signed, Lithuania submitted a separate referral in respect of Ukraine, and it was considered a welcome intervention and an additional direction to the prosecutor, and the same would be true in respect of Palestine. What we've had tonight from government, who I have to say didn't even have the manners to send a cabinet minister to debate, is a set of excuses. Excuses as to why they don't have to refer the actions of Israel in Gaza to the International Criminal Court, but not a single viable reason as to why they can't. Because government can and government should make this referral. If Ireland, Cathaoirleach, is to maintain our credibility on international law when so many world leaders and particularly EU leaders have lost their credibility, then we must be consistent. And for all the fact that the Irish government is better than many on this issue, there remains a glaring inconsistency in the approach to Ukraine versus Palestine. There are multiple instances where more than one referral was made to the International Criminal Court in respect of the same territory. And not once were those who made those referrals accused of politicising the International Criminal Court, a charge that the earlier minister said would be made against Ireland if we were to ask the ICC to investigate the most heinous and grotesque breaches of international law that are happening in the world right now in Gaza. He didn't say, of course, who precisely would make that charge, but we can guess who he was afraid of. Ireland is entitled, under Article 14, Section 2, to request that the International Criminal Court prosecutor focus on the specific crimes that have been committed in Palestine since October the 7th this year. The government's argument is that the current referral by the State of Palestine covers this period. But I'm sure, and I hope that the Minister knows, that while that referral does include a broad call for the investigation for Israeli action since 2014, you should also know that it specifies instances that, of course, do not include the recent atrocities committed in Gaza. Now, I have to say, the most spurious argument of all brought before government is that the reason they signed the Ukraine referral was because Ukraine hadn't previously been a signatory to the International Criminal Court, and there's no need in respect of Palestine. So because Ukraine wasn't a member of the Rome Statute, it deserved 40-odd countries to come before it. But because Palestine and the State of Palestine has signed up to international law, it must stand alone. What we have had tonight, Cathaoirleach, and I'll finish on this, are shameful excuses and blatant double standards. Strong words must be met by actions, and the most basic action that Ireland can exercise is our right to refer the war-mongering Israeli regime to the only international authority that has the remit to investigate. And I want to appeal to those government and independent TDs to do the right thing by rejecting the government's watery counter-resolution and by supporting the Sinn Féin motion as the very least that Ireland can do. If we don't take this step, then clearly government have to answer, what precisely do you intend to do other than to utter words? The people of Palestine need much more than words, Minister.
Thank you. No, thank you. At this stage, I have to ask the question that the government amendment be made. The deputies who are in favour of the question say tá. The deputies who are against? Neil. Sheila McGowill and Kesh Richa. Vote all. The division was deferred until the weekly division tomorrow evening. Thank you very much.